Welcome to Genuine Life Recovery. We're here to help you and your loved ones overcome addictions and other addiction related mental health challenges. In this show, we dive into the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual aspects of addiction, mental health, recovery, family dynamics, codependency, and more. You can listen on your favorite app or at jodiestevens.org. Genuine Life Recovery is made possible by great friends like Joshua's Heart in memory of Joshua Brent Moore, bringing hope, love, and awareness to those afflicted by addiction, online at joshsheart.org, and Jodie Stevens Productions for commercial voiceover, narration, production, MC, and public speaking, online at jodiestevens.org. Hey friends, welcome back. I'm Jodie Stevens, and today we are talking about trauma, in particular, sexual trauma and abuse, and how it impacts us not only in our early childhood, but throughout our entire lives, and also how we can heal. So while my guest today didn't necessarily turn to addiction or substance use disorder to relieve that trauma, that is often the case. And so I like to talk trauma on this show and its impact because it does touch every area of our lives. So my guest today is Cindy Benezra, and Cindy suffered sexual abuse for years by her father at a very young age. But the great news is that Cindy found healing, she found hope, she's sharing her story today. She's written a powerful memoir called Under the Orange Blossom, which I can't wait to read. And of course, in the memoir, she shares her story, and today her mission is to be a voice to normalize speaking about sexual abuse, to give hope to others so that you can know that if that's your struggle, your story matters, that healing is possible. She's also founder of Cindy Talks, which is a platform where she talks about healing tools and stories of hope for trauma survivors. And she's a co-founder of a luxury event company, which is very cool, and lives in Seattle, Washington with her husband, and they are the parents to 4 adult children. So, right. Cindy, thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you, Jodie, for having me.
I love Seattle. My parents met at Pullman University in Washington, and just love hiking in that area, Olympic National Park and all that stuff. In fact, my mom's side of the family all lives in Yakima,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is not that pretty, but
That's where all the apples come from. So,
yeah,
yeah.
true.
hmm
So so at the time of this recording, did you get pummeled with snow in Seattle?
No, actually, we've
Okay,
been pretty
okay.
good. We had some snow, but it's like the usual amount of snow. It's nothing. It wasn't jaw dropping, and it didn't stop or freeze the city. And we're not used to being in snow here, so like a few inches is manageable. But yeah, I always find it amazing that in other places where it doesn't rain very much, and I go and
Uh-huh.
travel there, and I'm like, why is the traffic so slow? It's just because you just don't know how
Yeah.
to drive in different climates.
I know. That it was Portland. That's where Portland got
Oh,
hammered with
Portland.
snow, not Seattle. So that's what it was. I was thinking it was Seattle. So yeah, for you guys, it was probably just, oh, look, we have more rain than normal.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
well, Cindy, thanks for being willing to share your story and to discuss trauma. I think it's so important. Trauma wires our brain differently. Like from a young age, it can cause us all kinds of mental problems, physical problems, emotional problems,
hmm
addictions, just so many things. But a lot of times I think people come out of trauma, right, and they think there's something wrong with them. And really, it's like everything you're experiencing is sort of a normal reaction to trauma. And so healing's possible. It just takes time and some work, right?
Definitely. I think it's a journey if you choose to go through different healing journeys. It's like
Yeah.
it's like building stones, and it as you unfold one, then you realize there's something more in it. And I think it's just sort of like it reminds me of the evolution of just being human.
Yeah.
We think we know it all, and then as we unfold, we're like, "Oh, I really don't know anything," and we just keep on evolving. And I think healing is a lot like that. There's no magic pill. There's no magic bullet. There's not a prescription. It's just time and kind of perseverance and trying to find ways to heal that suit you.
Yeah, yeah. And really just looking at your story and personal reflection and doing the deal. So I commend you for that. It is a hard journey, but it is so necessary and there's so much beauty on the other side. So
Absolutely.
kind of give me, oh, sorry, you were going to say something.
No, absolutely. There is so much beauty on the other side. I think that's kind of that was sort of an epiphany as a kid, just thinking like, if I could just only make it, if I could only survive, like I can't,
Yeah.
I just have to survive just to make this because there is so much beauty on the other side.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, goodness. And so much of our coping strategies and reactions to trauma are trying to survive. We're doing what's right at the time, right? And then we get out into the real world and we're like, oh, wow, that thing I was doing doesn't really work in the world where this trauma doesn't exist. And so then we can have this shame and beat ourselves up. But really, we're coping in a way that probably saved our life at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I think so too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So give me your 10-minute version, 10 to 12-minute, whatever version of your story. Obviously, our lives are long, our stories are long and
Oh,
involved,
yeah.
but where you were then as a child, what happened to bring you to this point now? And then we can kind of backtrack a little and talk about some of the story and coping strategies and healing and all that stuff too.
Okay. So, let's see here. I'm born into a family of two immigrants. My dad's German, my mom's Mexican, and
Wow.
middle America and in Phoenix, Arizona. And they were very, very hard workers, sometimes held two jobs, three jobs, just to make ends meet. And the, I just remember always having parents that were constantly trying to excel. And my dad eventually got his master's in engineering, and my mom was sewing in the middle of the night because she's a seamstress, and she was sewing in the middle of the night to make extra money. And, I just, when I think about my life, um, before I had, um, well, let's just say this. I always thought my life was pretty normal. I knew it was really weird, but I thought I lived a fairly normal life because you don't know what goes on behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And so I'm 60 now, and way back in the
What?
70s, yeah,
No
yeah,
way.
gosh, and way back in the 70s, it was kind of a little bit of a beaver cleaver family.
Yeah.
You never talk about dark secrets or anything that happens behind closed doors. And I remember things that would happen in our household. My mom would say, what happens in our household stays here. We
Oh
never share
gosh.
anything. We don't share it with relatives. This is our life and it's private. So do not share anything other than what you had for dinner, or basically. That's kind of like how it was instilled in me. And I
Hmm.
even noticed that I was even careful with like sharing with aunts and uncles and outside family, because my mother was so particular about, what did you talk about? What did you say? I mean, she would kind of quiz me on that. So, but basically, my story about my abuse and trauma is that my dad was a very narcissistic man and a very domineering one. And we lived in rural Arizona, so very isolated from family. Um, and from the age of 5 to 10, he sexually molested me. And how did that happen? Without anybody knowing is beyond me. I think a lot of it was parents or a mother who really didn't want to see what was going on in the household. Um, I don't I don't know what happened to my teachers because I had bruises on myself. I think I fell through the system. I did share it with certain people. I got put into a shelter for a while with my mother and my sister. Once I told about what happened, and then my father promised that he would never hurt me physically because that's what all my mother could see. And my hymen was intact. I had no broken bones, so I got put back into the household. Neighbors never said anything, even though it was obvious, I would think. And also, the school district just kind of it was just a broken system, and we really didn't have a whole lot happening. Um, we just didn't have a lot of resources. And in fact, I think about the
Yeah.
shelter that we went into, people, it wasn't, there wasn't a shelter or even a sexual abuse kit at that time. So we were just kind of mixed in with different people. And so those were just new and upcoming laws. So I can see how I fell through the cracks though. But I forgot about what happened to me. My dad's a true pedophile, and I forgot about what happened to me because at the age of 10, I started going through puberty and he was no longer interested in me. And so I was able to kind of recreate myself since I had a break from this trauma. My dad just kind of left me alone. And as far as I knew, I had a normal childhood until I had flashbacks. And in my flashbacks, I was 16. I lived overseas. From Arizona, I moved to Iran. And then after Iran, there was a certain cutoff age where we had to go to boarding school. And in boarding school, without my parents, I was able just to kind of recreate myself. And I just blanked out, forgot about my whole life. All I knew it was Barbie dolls and swimming pools. That's all I knew. I only remembered the good things in life. And later on, when I started to become sexually active, it was just about 17, did I start to recall my past, and it came in form of nightmares and fragmented nightmares. And I journaled my whole life back together in these fragments. And with this journal, I basically took my journal and I decided to write later on in life, Under the Orange Blossoms, my book, and my perspective of what it was like to go through as a 16, recalling my history and looking at my parents and then feeling suicidal because I couldn't even cope with the daunting darkness that I just kind of hid, and it just started to unravel and I just didn't know what to do. So that's the premise of my book, is like how I
Hmm.
went through that and then my journey of healing and what I wanted to do from there.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So, what were the kind of flashbacks like? I mean, what was that experience like? Did you think you were losing your mind or what?
I really thought I was losing my mind, and I would go to my mom after
Hmm.
a while because I had so much in my journal. And I would tell her, I said, I think I'm going crazy. I'm having these dreams. In my book, I share that experience where I told my mom, like, why am I having these dreams about dad? And my mom just kind of shuts down. And she was reading a
Mm.
book at the time about Mary Queen of Scots. And I remember hugging her and saying, Mom, I think I'm going crazy. I'm dreaming dad's, like touching me at night. And then she just started on, do you want to hear the story about Mary Queen Scots? And she just was telling me the story. And I thought, oh no. And it was sort of a verification that it was true, that
Yeah.
these dreams were, because who does that? I mean, I don't know. I even knew at 16 that that was just like a big clue that this was reality. And then when I confronted my father, it was a lot of the same thing too. He was like, "Did you read it in a book? Did you see it in a movie? Are you ill? Are you okay?" Um, and with like this huge performance, I think I realized that's when I looked into his big blue eyes and I thought, "Oh no, he is lying. This is really true." And I think that's when I fell in through such a deep um, depression because I realized the people who I thought were I had an idea of what my parents were like. I knew I didn't like my dad, but I felt betrayed by my mom, let's just say that. And
Yeah.
I thought my protectors, these people who have provided a wonderful life for me, have failed. And my reality was blown and shattered. And I realized like I didn't know what to do, who to trust, how to trust myself, or how to even want to like get up the next morning. And so Tragically, I wanted to jump from my window every day, and I practiced jumping from my window, thought
Mm.
about it, and would think about, like, well, what if I jumped, and would do the pros and cons about jumping and killing myself in a foreign country. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but I was just terrified of going to a foreign hospital. And my mother kept on telling me that they never would have the best care as they would in America. So that's what actually prevented me, was getting like a secondary disease. But
But what if
um,
I survived and I was totally mangled? That's what I've thought.
oh yeah, I remember
It's
write
not
this
funny.
all
We're
in my
not
book.
laughing it's just sometimes you have to look back and laugh at sort of these things because it's part of the healing process. But
Right? Why
wow.
should I continue? And
Mm.
um, it it was pretty eye opening. And so from there, I started like this whole journey on how can I heal, because I decided I want to live even though I felt like I wanted to die. And the only reason I wanted to die is just because I just couldn't believe that I came from this lifestyle.
Do you think
And
your mom ignored it or shoved it down because she felt trapped, like she had nowhere to go? She was an because at that point, where was she from? Did she immigrate here and so she just sort of pretended it didn't exist to make it okay?
I think my mom was I think she was codependent, and I
Yeah.
think she did a lot of things to she lived a life in denial.
Yeah.
And I recognize that even as it just is who she is. I just recognize that she was always just in denial, even with her health. She would try to find somebody to give her the right answer about her health or switch doctors. And I did so a lot of the
Yeah.
things that she did, it was just, I would just kind of look at her and just go, huh, okay, you be you, but I'm going to be me. I
Yeah.
also have to tell you this, that I was a very feisty teenager. So I used to always think that I was born in the wrong family, like I was the alien in my family. And how did I get these parents? So it was always that constant struggle to, like, well, how did I get in this family? So I thought it was a
Yeah.
mistake. So it was kind of just a weird, horrible time in my life, but it really
Oh,
did set me on this journey. And I do have to say, I did think about drowning myself out, and because in Spain there was a drinking age. And I remember thinking about just drowning myself out in, I don't know, whatever it could be. But I realized that wasn't the solution, and that's not where I wanted to go. And I know that statistically, people who have suffered sexual abuse, sexual assault, or anything like that in their life usually turn to drugs and alcohol. It just it just didn't. I don't have an addictive personality, and I bet you that
hmm.
that could be possibly it. But I think I just challenged myself. I just kind of chose, how do I be the opposite of my parents?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of like where I started from, like my baseline.
Did you struggle later with making decisions and things like that? What's interesting a lot of times about abuse and trauma is you're explaining to your parents what happened to you and they're invalidating it. So your instincts say, "Well, I know this happened, but I'm being told it's something else." And so sometimes later in life, we just have these challenges where we want to trust our instincts, but we've been told from an early age that our instincts were wrong. Did you find that it was a challenge for you to, second guess every single thing that you did or thought because of that?
Um, It wasn't my parents, I think it became everybody.
Yeah,
Everybody, they were, I just, my trust issues. I still struggle with
yeah.
trust issues. That is something that's just the downfall of what happened. And I still struggle with that. And it's, from what I've learned from therapy, it's more like it goes into the attachment and the
Mm-hmm.
trust
Yeah.
levels, betrayal, that type of thing. And what I found was really interesting, and I think maybe you could, I think anybody coming from a dysfunctional family, um, when it's reading your room, reading your audience, reading the person, you become almost like hyper vigilant, and you
Yeah.
start to kind of look at the person. And it's almost like, I'm not going to say psychic, but that's like the best word I could describe it. But you really start to read everybody around you. You look and you get in a room and you observe really quickly. And after a while, by the time you hit your 50s, you're pretty good at it. I mean, you walk into a room and go, "Oh, there's a lot of weird energy in this room." And I think
Yeah.
that was
So you kind
something
of went
that,
the opposite way. Instead of shoving everything inside and ignoring your instincts, which is what I did. I wasn't sexually abused, but came from a very codependent home. Like, don't feel that way. Stop feeling that way. So I stopped. And so I would
uh,
shove all my instincts, whereas you kind of went this hyper vigilant, like,
mhm,
because with trauma, we just believe the world's not safe, right? And of course, we know the world's
right.
not really safe, but you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
grow up and have this because the people that were supposed to create a safety for me, they betrayed me. So your brain's literally wired that way to where we're like, the world's not safe. I got it. So it sounds like you were more hyper vigilant.
Right. And eventually I decided that that didn't serve me either. So I kept on, I had to find a way to stop reading people, stop looking at them, and just kind of go with the flow. Because
Yeah.
obviously I'm an old lady now and I'm going to be perfectly fine. I know what's right and what's wrong, and I know my decisions, and I know who I am now. But it was a gift, and then at same token, it was almost like a curse where I had to say, "Okay, stop doing this."
Yeah.
Just like live life, and then make good choices with that. But it took a lot of therapy. I have probably done therapy since I've been 18 years old. I mean, it's just been ever. And honestly, I can tell you almost every kind of format. It would take hours just to go over how much different types of therapy I have, and alternative different kinds of therapy, and
Yeah.
my experiences with therapists. I didn't realize that even that if you're with a therapist and it doesn't work for you, like, you could actually just say, "Hey, this is not resonating with me. Can we just try something else?" Or
Yeah.
like, "Geez, I've been with you for like half a year and I think I'm ready just to try something different. And can we end from here?" And a lot of times I found my best referrals from therapists. It's not like it's a
Yeah.
marriage, like you're getting a divorce. It's like you
Yeah.
have control of this. So I found that to be even an experience too.
That's good, and I think anybody with challenges, we all go through that because we go into the therapy and we sort of look up to the person, or they call it like transference, like this therapist is like my dad, or a lot of those issues will come out. But I always think with therapy, I always tell people it's just like a product. It's like any other, and they know that too. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so they're usually, if they're a good therapist, they're more than happy to say, "Look, I may not be the right fit for you. I think what your challenges are going to be for this person, or to see this person," and so to think of it as a product. But it's very hard at first because I've been through that when we're super wounded and you call and one therapist doesn't work out, and you get triggered all the way back to childhood, and you're like, you have to kind of grieve through that and then just find another therapist. But that is very hard, and I wish they talked about that more and explained that more to people. But they don't. It's something we sort of have to walk through. So I'm assuming then that you were diagnosed then with PTSD at some point from your childhood. Okay.
Complex. Yeah.
Okay. And what was that like to work through that? Did that accompany your writing as well
Uh,
when you started writing the memoir, or were they two kind of separate issues? Do you still have flashbacks, or would you say you've healed from the PTSD? That was like a six-part question, but
Let me unpack it.
yeah.
Um, I found that's a great question. So I thought that I had unfolded pretty much most most of the little skeletons hiding in there, and I thought maybe the cobwebs were even like swished away. I thought, "Oh, this is great," until when I decided to write my book. And as I started to write my book, it was very different. I think writing through trauma
Hmm.
is traumatizing. or it can be traumatizing. It was traumatizing for myself.
Yeah.
And I think it's because as a survivor, I had to describe things and I had to choose like, how much do I want to share? How much
Yeah.
do I not want to share? How do I protect my readers so that they could finish the story? So it was a very, very different thing. So I had to write everything out and then describe it in detail so that someone could envision it and then later on pick, okay, that's too much information. How do I describe, like
Yeah.
what was what was the setting of the room? Was it dark? Where was my pain in my body? What was I feeling? What was I hearing? um, and I think in that, when you're writing in such detail, and trying to be authentic, I tried to show um, really like what my mindset was like as a 16-year-old, and I was very open and childlike, I think. And so to really put myself in that situation, I would almost even meditate to try to find and then journal and write. And that I found traumatizing. So much where my husband said, you can't do this. You're going to actually make yourself sick and you got to stop doing this. And I kept on thinking, like, this is not about me. I mean, this is not like a fun conversation, but I just
Yeah.
kept on thinking about myself. So I lived in Spain. I had no resources. I didn't speak the language. I couldn't go to the local library to look up any information. And at that time, there were only therapeutic um, information that you could get from the library. And it was kind of hard. They just didn't write a lot about it. And then any kind of books on it, they were oh gosh, traumatizing stories, and that would just make it worse for me.
Hmm.
And I wanted to find something where somebody made it through, and what are the things that how did they make it through? I wanted hope. I wanted um, just like some basic tools, and I couldn't find anything. And that always gave me the idea. So here I am in Spain, and I thought, well, okay, I got to find my own tools. I got to make this up. Like, what works for me? And so that's how I started with my journey. And I also give that information on the back of my book, the tools that I used as a kid. And actually, they're the same things that I've learned in therapy, but they're
Yeah.
a lot more sophisticated, and they've evolved. And basically, it was visualization work. What else? I did a lot of picture boards where you would take out things from magazines, and I would try to envision a different life. I wrote a lot. What else did I do? I had words that owned me. So because I was in school and I was having these flashbacks. So I was kind of failing at school. And I had a lot of words like, you're stupid, you're dumb, you're ugly,
Mm.
because I couldn't stand who I was. And I would
Mm.
have these words, and I would actually write them down, take them into the shower almost every day, take them in the shower in a felt pen, watch the words just melt off my piece of paper. And I would envision those words coming off my body, that I didn't own them. I might have had to do it the next day, but that was just a constant thing. I was doing mantras and anything to change my mindset of who I was. And I would repeat it hundreds of times just to find something that I liked about myself or have a different mindset and try. It made me a very unusual teenager, let's just say, but nobody,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, but nobody really knew that I was going through this stuff because I was never expressing it. And I asked around now still at some friends, and they were like, no, you just seem normal. So you can hide it pretty well. But I was considered spacey Cindy. So I'm sure that was a lot of it was just dissociation and going someplace else. I think I struggled a lot with that during my teens.
Were you diagnosed with a dissociative disorder? Did you have any type of, well, it used to be called multiple personality, but now it's DID or whatever.
Did I do
Did you
right?
find that you struggled with that or more just sort of going away?
I would call it vacation. I would take a
Yeah.
vacation, yeah, just like kinda going away. I
Mhm.
realized, I didn't even know what it was, but I read
Yeah.
about it, and I think my whole
Yeah.
world stopped. I was like, "What? Dissociation? I oh my goodness." Um, that was a big wake-up call, and I think in knowing what it was, I was trying to be more cognizant of staying present. But I think trauma, just what I would have trauma or watch anything, I would just kind of like going, oh, well, and I would just daydream. That's what it felt like. It was just daydreaming. And then I would
Yeah.
check back into like what's going on. But no, I didn't get a diagnosis of that. Mine was post traumatic stress. And when I was writing, I went through a lot of that all over again. And I was just stunned that sometimes there are cobwebs in there that you thought that you
Yeah.
cleared away. Yeah.
Well, and those are actually our brains are incredible in how we cope and how we survive. And that disassociation is what saved you, you know? And so
Absolutely.
it's a normal reaction. Do you find you're a lot more aware of it now? Like they call those kind of, disassociating or triggers where maybe someone reminds you of your father. So all of a sudden you're, oh, are you kind of cognizant of those things now?
Um, I don't really seem to get a lot of this anymore. I've worked past it.
Yeah.
Also, writing the book, I started doing a lot more trauma therapy where it was really specialized to certain things. It was
Mm-hmm.
bizarre. I just unfolded one recently, and that was cinnamon. I would eat not a blast of cinnamon, like a cookie, like for Christmas. It was just like a hint of cinnamon, and I discovered this through my trauma therapist when we were doing it's the light work. What help me with that term again, where you follow it
Oh,
from left to right?
EMDR. Mm-hmm.
EMDR. And so we did a session on that, and I tried to figure out like where did this come from?
Yeah.
And it was basically because when my dad would come into my room and molest me, there was a candle that was an artificial candle that had cinnamon in it. And
Oh,
every time I would just take like if a hint of cinnamon was in some food, it would stop me and I would freeze, and I it drove me bananas, and I didn't know how. Sometimes you think these things are personality glitches or you just don't like something. And then when I
right.
went through that work, I was like, wow, like how much of the things do I do that are not my personality, that are just hidden little things in from my past. And I found that to be fascinating. But I could eat cinnamon now, so I'm all good.
And how did trauma influence your relationships around you as you got older and we're still working through some of this stuff?
I think, you know, maybe you could help me through this. Thank you for this. This is great. Let's do a therapy session here. Um, so I found I was also a very social person,
Uh-huh.
but I would consider myself an introvert. But socially, I've always been okay. And so I never really had an issue with that. I bonded very closely to my mother. So I do have I can bond and I have true love. I had a loving, loving relationship with my mother. So
Yeah.
in that way, it really helped me. However, I always struggled with the betrayal part of it, and then in that, trusting adults, and getting worried about being betrayed, I think is
Yeah.
still an issue that struggle to this day. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't know how like, sometimes I get into trauma loops a little bit with the betrayal
Mm-hmm.
where they kinda cycle back and I have to stop myself. It's a hard one. I don't know I that's the part where I kind of always tell myself there's not a magic wand, there's not a
Yeah.
magic bullet, there's no pill, and so how do I find a different way a different source of therapy to help me with that? And so I'm kind of like on a quest for that right now.
That's a hard one, and I think it just too it comes back to that early development where the people we loved and trusted, they did betray us. And so sometimes when we get afraid of that, it becomes, for me, it's always I have to go, okay, that was maybe true then, but is it true today about this person? Or is it true? Like, what's true today versus then, And sometimes that is a process, because we can just feel like almost that triggered back to that time, and I've experienced this with the father wounds and looking at the male authority figure and then saying, okay, is this person, you know he puts his pants on one leg at a time, he's not my dad, or you know what I mean. And so we have to just remind ourselves that, okay, I'm a grown adult woman, I'm not five, and this person is what may have been true then is not true today, right? But it's hard,
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. So that is something I still carry to this day. But flashbacks, no. I am on an antidepressant, but I don't know. I kind of think most of the world is at this point, especially after COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and there's a great time for medication. I mean, it does wonders. It helps to reset our brains, because right, if our brain, I mean, when your brain's wired for trauma, it impacts all the levels of dopamine, of serotonin, of all those sorts of things, because that's just Oh, I mean, if you think about when you were experiencing that abuse, your brain was forming, like it was forming.
Right.
And so it
Mhm.
forms that way. And so we have to rewire our brain a lot of times, and that takes time. And there's nothing wrong with that. It definitely can be stigmatized, but I always think that's silly because it's helping you live a better life, and that's super important. Talk to me about your relationship with your dad now. I heard that you had contemplated killing him. Um, so
Yeah.
what has that been like? Is he still with us? Did you confront him? My understanding when I was watching you on another podcast that you had done that, and what happened there?
Um, well, okay. So so this was before 10. I'm going to guess here because it's in these ages, it was all a blur. It was
Hmm.
7, 8, 9. I'm going to say somewhere in there. Um, I contemplated killing my dad. And basically, because my mom and my sister were complaining about him all the time, and I kept on hearing them like, he needs to be stopped. He's just this horrible person. And I was thinking, well, I haven't shared my story with them, but I was thinking, well, yeah, I need to stop him. And I didn't want to involve my sister and my mother in the story because then if I did kill my father, then they would have to go to jail too. And I didn't want that to happen. So I would practice killing my father in my mind, different ways, and just to stop him so that this would never happen again to myself or to anybody else.
Yeah.
Rat poisoning. I thought, well, gosh, if I stick that in some tea, maybe he'll drink his tea or his coffee. But then I thought, oh boy, my sister would, she'll drink the tea. She used to sip tea and coffee at the end of the table
Yeah.
all the time. And I thought, oh no, my sister could get hurt. And my mom and my sister would crack jokes. I mean, it just shows you how dysfunctional it was. We would sit around and talk about ways about killing my father, and they were like, "Oh, maybe we could bring the toaster in the bathtub," and just horrible things. I mean, like very very dysfunctional. Anyway, I took the cutlery from the kitchen and I thought maybe about stabbing my father. And I brought a pillow hid the cutlery in the room, a knife in my bed. And then I would practice stabbing my pillow, thinking it was my father coming in at night. And, but then I realized that I had ribs and it was dark. I couldn't really see. And plus, had a butter knife because we weren't allowed to play with sharp knives. So
Right,
it was a
right.
butter knife too. So that was just a bad idea. And I remember my mom saying, Cindy, what is all the cutlery doing behind your bed? Because I kept on taking a knife after a knife and it just didn't happen. So, I mean, I felt very, very trapped. And
Yeah,
later on, what changed me from not doing something worse, I think I had, it was basically an epiphany that I was scared, that
yeah,
I had become just like my father. I was just as angry. I started repeating the same things he said. I was started using the same tactics that he used. And I thought, oh my gosh, I am my father. Like I have become the monster that I've been trying to run away my whole life. So that that was one part of it. And then later on, when I did confront him, he never admitted who what he had done. Um, I had to be true to myself. I always kept in contact with him, but I had a
mhm,
lot of boundaries with my dad. He was able to come into the house only to the kitchen table. He was not allowed to go into the kids' bedrooms, and mainly because it was his word against my word. Sometimes I felt like I was crazy. Did this really happen? You know, I was it was
yeah,
such a hard journey for me, and to leave him and never talk to him again was more energy for me, so I had to be true to myself and my kids. I didn't explain it to my kids just yet. I explained it to them in different ages where I felt that they could understand what had
yeah,
happened in the past, and they were all like, "Oh, that's why you won't let us be around him," or, "Oh, that's why he can't go into our bedrooms," or, "Oh, that's why he's so strange." And so it kind of made sense to them, but I could only tell them at certain times. And later on, when he became elderly, I ended up taking care of my father. There was nobody else to take care of him. And in this process, I put him, it was all about me. I put him, for convenience sake, I moved him about like 5 minutes away from my house because I would have to
mhm,
go back and forth. And in that process, he said, well, I had to ask. I've always been a truth seeker. I said, so dad, why did you do this? And he was already in his 80s. And he looked at me and referred me to a duck in the water, which I thought was just very bizarre. And he said, basically, his analogy was that I was like the duck. So you could pour water on me and I would always continue to float. And he said that he really resented that about me. He also shared that he was raped by soldiers in the war. And
oh my gosh.
then he retracted that later on. But in that, I found it so fascinating. I thought, oh, okay, now I have to write this book that I've always wanted to write. So then I actually am interviewing him, and he agreed to do the book, and he felt that it would help somebody else. He also felt that, well, I don't know about this, but this is my belief. I think he felt that it was I'm very spiritual. So I felt that it was sort of, he knew he was going to pass, and maybe that this was
Yeah,
a deed, or maybe it would make this horrible wrong a right by giving somebody else and listen so that they could listen to the apology. So I did record my dad, and I do have him in audio. And
wow,
but the weirdest part about that, I have to tell you, Jody, I don't think I ever really, I thought I needed the apology, but it wasn't the apology. I think I realized that I always had, I never really realized that I was the one who was the person who had to heal in that. Like I always had the power to heal. I just didn't recognize that the apology would do nothing. And it wasn't even the right apology I wanted to hear.
right, yeah, exactly. Wow, so he did confess in the
Mhm.
end, in a sort of indirect way, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Your story reminds me so much. You probably don't know Joyce Meyer, but she's a wonderful, she's actually a Christian evangelist, but she's got, oh, tons and tons of books. And anyway, she's wonderful. But her father sexually abused her. She talks about it a lot, and she also took care of him. So it's, yeah, you two have a lot in common. So you'll have to look her up.
Joyce
Yeah.
Myers.
Joyce
Okay.
Meyer. Yeah.
Meyer. Okay, I will look her
Emmy,
up.
yeah. So how did forgiveness play a role in your healing, forgiving your family?
It did. I have to say, before I go into that, I think healing is very complicated. Also, just coming from a dysfunctional family, we
Yeah.
all go through it differently. And just dysfunction in general, it plays havoc on every person in the household. It's not just, it, it rips through every soul in that
Yeah.
household, and it affects everybody differently. And
Yeah, they
I
liken
think,
it to like a kaleidoscope where
I
with
mean,
all the
yes.
little hanging, like one thing affects this and that and that and that, and just the dysfunctional codependent family dynamics,
Hmm. Hmm. And I think I want to preference whatever I did, it worked for me.
Yeah.
And what other people did or didn't do, it worked for them. And I think all family members have to be um, supported in their decision of doing what works right for them. And it doesn't mean that you can't change that scenario. You could still change that. But for me, um, I wouldn't, it's a very confusing thing about forgiveness. I wouldn't say I forgave him for the act of what he did. I
Yeah.
forgave him um, kind of like in my heart, like I don't carry that toxic weight that I used to have. And I
Yeah.
talked to him about that. And I think that's what I let go of. And as soon as I let go of that just heavy burden that I used to blame myself, I mean, it was a whole evolution. Um,
Yeah.
it just moved on, and in that process of talking to him, it wasn't just a straightforward forgiveness, but it was forgiving. Forgive.
Hmm.
We forgave. He did too. He apologized, and it wasn't the right thing that I wanted to hear, but I recognize it's his apology, not the one that I wanted to hear. I had to write my own apology. So, what I wanted to hear. And so, yeah, I forgave him, and I'm not, and I took care of him to his final years because it worked out for me. And
Yeah.
forgiveness is a process. And if you don't want to forgive, then that's your journey. It's your decision, but it is a very, very complicated individual process.
Yeah.
What are
They
your
say
thoughts on that?
huh? Well, so as a Christian person, they say, you've forgiven someone when you genuinely want what's best for them.
Hmm.
And so that's for me how I always know when the resentment stops. And so whenever that happens, like, and it takes years sometimes. It's a choice where you say, I choose to forgive, and then I wake up the next day and I have to choose to forgive again. And then I wake up the next day and then I just pray for them and I pray for them and I pray for them, even though I don't want to, and it's very hard. And then pretty soon your heart will line with the mind. So
Hmm.
the heart doesn't come first, the mind comes first. So we always get it backwards. So we have to make a choice. We do it, eventually the heart lines up. And then once I wake up and I'm actually happy if the person's doing well, even though they betrayed me, then I know I've forgiven them. And it takes a long time. So I think even though our heart doesn't always want to, I think when we make the choice, we're kind of already there. It's just like healing. We've made the choice we're going to heal, and then it's the sanctification. It's a whole lifelong process. And so when we talk about you must forgive, it's like, well, yeah, but you make the choice, and over the lifetime you get there. You know what I mean? Which it sounds like you kind of went on that same journey where you didn't wake up every morning, and the anger became less and less, and you didn't no longer wanted to kill him, and then it was just neutral, and then in the end you kind of, okay, I love you, Dad, in that way, and you kind of make peace with it.
Right. And I think what it was, I think I just made peace. I thought, well, like, if a dog got hit on the side of the road, I would pick up the dog even if the dog bit me. I would take it and
Yeah,
take
yeah,
the dog to go get services. I kind of thought about that. You always have to put yourself in different shoes and try to think about it. And I don't think I could have lived with myself if I didn't take care of
yeah,
of a human being. And that's the way I looked at it. And I thought, he stunk, but I'm going to get him some medical care.
yeah,
And I have to be true to who I am. And
yeah.
that feels right. And it resonates right with my body. And I don't regret that. And I feel it was the right decision to make for myself.
Yeah, and you
Hmm.
have to do what you can live with. That's what
Absolutely.
one mom told me, whose mother had passed from alcoholism, and it really actually helped me because there's all this advice on things that we should and shouldn't do, but in the end, you have to do what you can live with. And you were also healthy enough to integrate back in with your
Absolutely.
father, and
Yeah.
that's a huge piece too, because a lot of times we have to remove ourselves from the family and from the dynamic because it's too triggering, especially if you turn to an addiction. You go back into that sick system, you'll start drinking again or using drugs or whatever. But once you heal enough, now you can reattach in a safer way, right? And so you were able to do that when you were ready, and that's totally okay, you know
Hmm. I like the way you said that. That was great.
So, talk to me about your work now. The statistic. What are some of the statistics on sexual abuse in childhood, and why are they so high?
So, tragically, there 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys here in America, and every time I say it, I still feel like it still leaves a little pit in my stomach, even just knowing that, um, because those are reported cases,
Yeah.
and
So we know it's
very,
higher,
very
probably.
unfortunate. It's very, very sad. I think it's epidemic in our country. Um,
Yeah.
we have a broken system. Basically, if you go to a therapist and you report what happens, then they often take you into foster care, or the parents removed. And my mom's greatest fear was that she wasn't my dad would threaten me. He said, if you tell, um, you won't have a roof over your head, and you know how much your mother wants to have a roof over your head. And if
Ugh.
you tell, you don't want to have the shame of our father. And we come from a great family. You know that? And so
Yeah.
then it was all this stuff. You're going to be removed from the school. You're not going to have the same friends. So those are the things that locked me. And my mom, I think a lot of it was the financial part that locked her. She was terrified of supporting a family on her
Mm.
own and being a single mom. Um, and I know that because she expressed that. So that was her fear. And unfortunately, we have a lot of broken systems, and a lot of these things, can resolve or can't be resolved. And I really hope that someday that we can talk about sexual abuse, sexual assault. I mean, all of this so commonly as we talk about drugs and alcohol, where if I think back, way back in the day when I was a kid, about a divorcee, they're like, oh, the lady down the street, the divorcee, and how taboo it was, or,
Right.
oh, uh, so and so drinks, 3 6 packs at the end of the evening, like, oh, hush, 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 very taboo in the neighborhood, and
Yeah.
they could be an alcoholic. But I mean, we just didn't talk about these things. But for some reason, when it comes to sexual abuse, we still don't talk about it. And I
Yeah.
honestly think it's because it's uncomfortable. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about our sex life in general. That's very private. And I think it's we don't want to out another family member because it destroys lives. But what really happens behind closed door, it destroys generations.
Yeah.
It creates health problems. There's a lot more to it. And until we're able to talk about this more frequently and find ways to fix our system, and will we be able to find some kind of resolution? And I'm really hoping that's my goal, is to just keep and continue to talk about um, sexual abuse and help others that have survived, and kind of make it a commonplace um, to talk about sexual abuse. So that's kind of
Yeah.
my goal. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's the secrecy as to why those numbers are so high as well. In many ways, there's a great book you'll have to read. It's about addiction, but it's called Lost in the Shuffle: The Codependent Reality, and it's by a guy by the name of Robert Subby. And I smile because he kind of it's funny, but at the same time it's so real, and it just talks about the rules. There's all these rules in the codependent family dynamic. Don't talk about sex. What stays under this roof. What happens in the family stays in the family. Do as I say, not as I do. Don't rock the boat. Like, there's all
Right.
these things, and you see it go from generation to generation. But in that stuffing of feelings and in that dysfunctional coping comes dysfunctional coping skills like alcoholism and trauma and bulimia, or whatever you want to call it. And you just see it roll from generation to generation. That's why they say the addict and the codependent are the same people, right? It's all the same stuff, and it just keeps rolling until we're able to see it and break the cycle. And that's really what you're doing with writing about this and overcoming all of that. So that is what's awesome. So I commend you for that. Talk to me about your book, a little bit more about what it's about and how people
Um,
can get it and all that stuff.
Actually, if you just put my name in there, Cindy
Uh huh.
Benezra, or cindytalks.com, or www.cindytalks.com, it'll pull up the information. And I am on every possible, I'm selling my book there. So, but
Yeah.
Amazon's probably the safest place to go. Yeah.
Okay. And then so you have the Cindy Talks. What's that all about as well? Is that a
Um,
podcast or YouTube, or what kind of stuff do you talk about?
so in there, it's so I have a blog, and
Uh-huh.
I write.
Oh, right.
uh,
Okay, so it's a blog, right? That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, it's a blog, and that's where also that's like my main focus. But
Mm-hmm.
in the blog, I have different videos, so it shares. It's a place where you could just go and get like the YouTube videos and social
Mm-hmm.
media, that type of thing. But I have a blog, and I highly encourage others who have walked a similar path as I have. And you don't have to be a sexual abuse victim, or I hate that word, victim. You don't have to be a person of, who has survived sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
um, it's really any form of trauma, because it's that form of trauma dysfunction that kind of destroys lives. And we're all, if you've walked that path, there's a lot of similarities to it. And I think you have to lean on somebody else to kind of hear their story and go, how did you do this? Or what did you do?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
what type of therapy? Or where are you getting your inspiration? And I think that it's a place for that. So that's kind of what Cindy Talks is about.
Awesome. And the book is called Under the Orange
Under the
Blossom.
Orange
Okay.
Blossoms.
And you're wearing orange. I love that.
And I'm wearing orange. And I have to say, so I used to run away all the time to the orange blossoms as a kid, because I just thought I lived in a house of crazy. So I'd
Yeah.
run away to the orange blossoms because it was quiet. And I would look at the trees as my role models. I know that sounds just the most bizarre thing. It's
Mm.
because I could trust. They had a purpose. They were flooded, they were fed, they produced beautiful fruit, that everything smelled fragrant. It was a place that I could escape, sort of like a sanctuary. And
Yeah.
I trusted nature more than I did people around me. And so that's kind of um, why I called it Under the Orange Blossoms, because that was a sanctuary that I would run away to.
It helped you, it saved you, it was therapeutic. That's wonderful. Nature is so therapeutic. I love nature. And anytime I can be in nature, I'm in nature, you know. So for people that have survived sexual abuse, trauma, any type of abuse, what's kind of some parting thoughts, advice, words of wisdom for them and their journey to healing?
I want to say that you are not alone. You will get through it. There's hope on the other side, that you're worthy of being loved, and you are love beings. And you have to remember that you are worthy of being loved, and there's hope.
Yes. And there's so much help. So
Mhm.
definitely seek help. And like we
Definitely.
talked about, remember, like you have the right to find the right help and the right therapist for you. There's so much help out there. And so definitely reach out to others and reach out for help. And reach out to Cindy. Do you have a website?
I do. It's www.cindytalks.com.
Okay, cool. Cindy, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your story, your journey, your book, your healing tools, all that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You're very inspiring. I listen to your podcast. It's great.
Thank you so much, friends, for listening to Genuine Life Recovery, playing on your favorite app or on my website at jodiestevens.org. It's JODIESTEVENS, jodiestevens.org. There you can check out my podcast, blog, recovery coaching info, speaking, and more. Check it out.